I wasn't expecting anyone that morning. It was one of those quiet, slow Saturdays where you're still in pajamas at 10 a.m., sipping lukewarm coffee and planning to do absolutely nothing. My little house, the one my grandparents left me, was filled with that gentle kind of silence that feels like safety. And then the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my brother Mark standing there with his newborn in one arm and a manila folder tucked under the other. He didn't even say hi. He just said, "We need to talk." Naturally, I assumed it was something baby related. Maybe he needed parenting advice, or maybe he and Jessica, his wife, had hit that new parent wall and needed a break. So I smiled, stepped aside, and said, "Come in, I'll make coffee." I didn't even get to the kitchen before he hit me with it. "You don't need this house anymore. You should give it to us. We've got a baby now." I actually laughed, not a chuckle, a full on laugh, because that sounded like the setup to one of Mark's bad jokes. But when I looked back at him, he wasn't smiling. He was dead serious. I blinked, waiting for the punchline that never came. "Wait, what?" I asked. He launched into this long-winded speech about how their apartment was too small, how their rent just went up, and how hard it was to raise a baby in a cramped space. Then he said without irony that since I was single and financially stable, I should give them my house, as if that made perfect logical sense. Let me explain something real quick. This house isn't a mansion. It's a two-bedroom cottage tucked away in a quiet neighborhood with creaky floors and hydrangeas out front. My grandparents used to bring me here every summer. Growing up, I learned to ride a bike on the sidewalk out front. My grandma taught me how to bake cornbread in the kitchen. When they passed, they left it to me. I spent almost every penny I had renovating it, new floors, plumbing, a complete kitchen redo. This place isn't just a roof over my head. It's mine. It's where I feel most like me. So when Mark said you're being selfish, we have a child to think about. I tried to stay calm. I said, "I'm sorry. Things are tough right now, but this house was left to me for a reason. I've worked hard to make it my home." He didn't take that well. That's when Jessica walked in from the car, apparently where she had been waiting this whole time like a little side character in a bad sitcom. She sat down without asking and started saying things like, "Family helps each other, and we already planned how we'd use the space." Planned, they had planned without even asking me. She had the audacity to suggest I could rent a nice little apartment somewhere since, quote, "you're just one person." I was stunned. I told them clearly, firmly, "No, this is my home. I'm not giving it up." And then they snapped. Jessica started crying, big dramatic reality TV tears, and said, "I knew she wouldn't understand. She's always been selfish." Mark's face twisted in frustration, and he said, "You're hoarding resources. This isn't fair." Hoarding, like I was sitting on gold bars instead of living in the only place that's ever felt like home. I asked them to leave. My voice was shaking, but I stood my ground. Before he left, Mark dropped the folder on my coffee table. "Just think about it. It's what's best for the family." When they were gone, I opened it. Inside were move-out timelines, a drafted email to my HOA, a maintenance budget. They had planned this like it was a done deal, like I was just an obstacle to clear out of the way, and that was only the beginning. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Mom. She said, "Sweetheart, maybe it's time to let go of the house. Mark has a baby now. It's only fair." My dad chimed in with, "You're single, you have flexibility." They don't. I tried to explain. I told them what this house meant to me, how I'd spent years saving, scraping, sacrificing. But it was like talking to a wall made of parental disappointment. Mom said something I'll never forget. "I thought we raised you better than this." Like I was the one being cruel, like I was the selfish one. For the next few days, I spiraled. I questioned myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being cold, too attached, too unwilling to bend. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't want to sound crazy. But then, one night, I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the kitchen I had retiled myself, the one that still smelled faintly of lemon oil and fresh paint, and I remembered what it cost me to have this home. I remembered the sleepless nights, the sore knees, the credit card juggling the YouTube tutorials on how to install a sink. And I knew deep in my bones, this wasn't about being fair. This was about them not respecting my boundaries, not respecting me. They didn't ask, they demanded, and when I said no, they tried to break me. I thought that was the end of it. I told myself they got their answer. I stood my ground. Now we can all move on, maybe awkwardly, maybe with some distance, but still, move on. But I was wrong. 2 days after that awful conversation, I came home from work and saw it, an envelope, taped to my front door. At first, I thought it was a notice from the HOA, or maybe something about my neighbor's dog again. But when I pulled it off and opened it, my heart sank. It was a notice of legal action. Mark and Jessica were trying to sue me for my own house. I sat down right there on the front steps, flipping through the pages with shaking hands. They were claiming the house was part of a shared family estate and that I had unfairly claimed it without consideration for the needs of others. They wanted the deed or the proceeds from selling it. It felt like I'd stepped into a nightmare. I didn't know I'd been cast in. The house wasn't some vague inheritance. We had a will. With my name clear as day, my grandparents had left it to me, not to the family, not to Mark, and definitely not to be divvied up based on who had diapers to buy. The next morning, I called my lawyer. She reassured me the will was ironclad, that I had nothing to worry about legally. But even with her calm voice on the line, I felt a heat rising in my chest that I couldn't shake. My own brother was taking me to court. It didn't end there. That afternoon, my phone started lighting up with Facebook notifications. A friend sent me screenshots. Jessica had posted a long, vague status update about toxic relatives who refused to help family during their time of need. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. The post was accompanied by a photo of their cramped apartment, dirty dishes stacked high, baby toys strewn everywhere, and a caption that read, "All we want is a safe place for our child. Is that really so selfish?" The comments rolled in. "You deserve better. Family is supposed to be there for each other. Who could be that heartless? My sister did the same thing to me. Don't let them win." Then came the DMs. "Aunt June, you know they're really struggling. Can't you just help them out? Cousin Evan, I thought you loved being an aunt. This isn't very loving. Someone I hadn't spoken to since middle school. Wow, I used to look up to you." Each message chipped away at me. Each one whispered, maybe they're right. Maybe I am the selfish one. Maybe I should give up the house. It's just a house, right? But then I'd walk into my living room and see the sun pour through the curtains. I sewed myself. I'd sit on the couch I saved for 6 months to buy. I'd touch the edge of the kitchen counter I installed with my bare hands. This wasn't just a house. It was everything I'd built to feel safe. And now it was under siege, and not just by Mark and Jessica. My parents were bankrolling their lawsuit. Yep, my own mom and dad. When I confronted them, my mom said, "We just want what's best for everyone." My dad added, "Mark's family is struggling." "You're doing okay?" I wanted to scream. How was this okay? Was it okay to invalidate everything I'd worked for just because I didn't have a baby strapped to my hip? Was it okay to ask me to sacrifice what little peace I had just because they thought Mark needed it more? Was I less of a daughter because I wasn't needy enough? I left that conversation hollow. Worse than hollow, I felt invisible. And that night while lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought, what if I just gave it to them? What if I walked away? Found an apartment somewhere, started over. At least the noise would stop, the messages, the guilt trips, the public shaming, the whispered accusations. Maybe that was worth more than granite countertops and a front porch swing. But then I remembered the sound of my grandmother's laughter echoing off these walls when I was little. I remembered the first night I slept here alone after inheriting the house. How scared I was, but also how proud. I remembered how no one else lifted a finger while I scraped wallpaper, while I pulled up water-damaged floorboards, while I called the city 10 times to fix a broken pipe under the yard. This wasn't just a house, it was mine. And I was tired of being made to feel like that didn't matter. I thought I had seen the worst of it. But one night, while going through the legal documents with my lawyer, she paused and furrowed her brow. "Hey," she said, tapping one of the pages. "Did you actually sign this?" I leaned over. It was a document buried deep in the pile. Something titled Family Agreement of Shared Property. It stated that I had agreed to let the house be shared between Mark and me, that we were co-heirs, that I would step aside if his family needed the property more urgently. And there at the bottom was a signature, my signature, except it wasn't. The handwriting was close, almost too close, but the loops on the Y were wrong. The spacing off, and my middle initial was missing. I stared at it, my chest tightening. "I never signed this," I whispered. My lawyer nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." She explained that proving forgery would take time, but we'd definitely use it to counter their claims. She said it could not only invalidate their entire case, it could lead to fraud charges. I walked out of her office, shaking, not from fear, from rage. They forged my signature. That was when the switch flipped. This wasn't just an overstepping brother or a misguided plea for help. This was calculated, planned cold. They had made me doubt myself, gaslighted me into thinking I was selfish, shamed me publicly, all while fabricating paperwork behind my back. I felt sick. The next week, one of my friends, Courtney, called. She sounded hesitant. "Hey, weird question," she said, "but didn't Jessica say they're broke?" I laughed bitterly. Why? Because I just saw her at that boutique baby store in Riverwalk. She was buying this $1,000 crib, you know, the one with the custom engraving? Of course she was. Courtney even sent me pictures later that day. Jessica smiling with 2 shopping bags in hand, posted just hours after she'd made another teary Facebook post about how they couldn't afford diapers. It was all fake. The apartment pictures, probably staged, the captions about sacrifice and struggle, carefully curated manipulation, and I'd fallen for it at least emotionally. I had let it make me question my worth, my voice, my right to set boundaries. Not anymore. I started keeping a folder, evidence screenshots, every contradictory post, every message from extended family. Shaming me, I began blocking people one by one. If they chose to believe Jessica's one-sided sob stories over picking up the phone and calling me, they didn't deserve a place in my life. I also started therapy again. I'd gone briefly after my grandparents died, but this felt like the kind of grief you can't name easily, like mourning the family you thought you had, the brother you believed still loved you, the parents you trusted to protect you. In one of our sessions, my therapist said something that stuck with me. Boundaries only feel cruel to people who benefited from you not having any. And suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't new. Mark had always been the golden child, the one my parents bent the rules for, the one who always meant well, even when he hurt people. I was the quiet one. The fixer, the one who didn't make waves until now. And now that I was finally standing up for myself, they couldn't handle it. They didn't see me as someone who had sacrificed, worked, bled, sweated for her own peace. They saw me as a spare part, a backup plan, the one who would understand, who would give in, who would do the right thing. Except this time, I wasn't going to. I was done being the emotional doormat. I started to prepare for a real fight with my lawyer by my side, and the truth finally laid out in front of me. I wasn't afraid of court anymore. I was angry, and under all that anger was a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. They lied, they manipulated, they crossed a line, and I was finally ready to make sure they knew I saw it all. There was a shift inside me. I don't know the exact moment it happened. Maybe it was during one of the long walks I started taking after work. Maybe it was when I finally stopped crying after phone calls with my parents. Or maybe it was the day I looked around my living room, the same room they tried to take from me, and didn't feel anger, just peace. The lawsuit was still ongoing, the forged documents still under review, and social media was still buzzing with half-truths and dramatic captions from Jessica. But somehow, I wasn't drowning in it anymore. I'd stopped checking Facebook. I deleted the app entirely. I blocked Mark and Jessica on everything. And then I blocked my parents. That part hurt more than I thought it would, but it also felt necessary. It wasn't punishment, it was protection. They made their choice. They didn't just stand by while someone tried to rob me. They helped load the truck. I had to grieve that, not just the betrayal, but the idea of who I thought my family was. I had to mourn the version of them I carried in my heart, the mom who used to braid my hair for school picture day, the dad who helped me build my first science fair volcano, the big brother who once gave me his hoodie when I got my first heartbreak. They were gone. Maybe they'd been gone for a while, and that realization hurt like hell. But it also freed me because now I didn't have to keep proving myself to them. I didn't have to keep trying to earn their love by giving up pieces of myself. I started small. One morning, I replaced the old curtains in my guest room. They were ones my mom had picked out, heavy floral, outdated. I replaced them with light linen panels that let in soft morning light. It changed the entire feel of the room. Then I started planting again. I hadn't touched my garden in months. I think a part of me associated it too closely with Jessica's voice telling me how they'd set up a playpen there. But now each bloom felt like a reclaiming. The rosemary, the lavender, the tiny tomatoes I'd always failed to grow but kept trying anyway. Every sprout was a tiny act of resistance, of healing. I told my lawyer I was ready to countersue if it came to that. We began gathering everything, screenshots, messages, even bank statements that proved Jessica wasn't the financial victim she portrayed online. And that document they forged, my lawyer said it could be criminal. That part of me that used to flinch at confrontation was quiet now. I was tired of being polite, tired of keeping the peace while others waged war on my boundaries. In therapy, I talked a lot about guilt, how it clung to me, how I still heard my mother's voice in my head. We thought you'd understand. Mark needs this more, but my therapist reminded me, understanding isn't the same as agreeing. You can understand where someone is coming from and still say no. That truth cracked something open in me. I could care and still say no. I could empathize and still protect myself. I could love someone and still walk away, and so I did. I stopped returning calls from extended family unless they genuinely wanted to understand my side. I wrote a long email to the people who mattered, cousins, close friends, explaining the truth in my own words. I didn't rant, I didn't accuse, I just told my story, my version, with facts, with heart. Some of them responded with love, some didn't respond at all, and that was okay because I wasn't doing it to convince anyone anymore. I was doing it to reclaim my voice. One night I sat on the front porch wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea. The house was quiet, the stars were out, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the villain in someone else's story. I felt like the main character in my own. I thought it was almost over. That maybe, just maybe, this whole nightmare would wrap up in a courtroom and I could quietly move on with my life. But life has a way of cracking open the past when you least expect it. It started when my lawyer asked me to gather some old documents, family records, just to reinforce my legal claim. Simple enough, I called the county clerk, requested what I could, and a few days later, a box showed up on my porch. Inside were papers I'd never seen before. Some of them were dusty, yellowed from time. At the bottom was a thin folder labeled in shaky cursive. For Ellie, from Grandma. I opened it. Inside were letters, legal documents, a note from my grandmother written long before I was born, and the truth spilled out like a wound. Mark isn't my full brother. He's my half-brother. My mom had an affair before she married my dad. Mark is the result of that. My grandparents, who'd always loved me, quietly but fiercely knew, and they were furious. They agreed to keep the secret to protect the family image, but they never forgot. In one letter, my grandmother wrote, "The house will go to Ellie. No confusion, no fight. This is not to be touched by anyone else." I sat on the floor for hours, rereading everything. So that's why they always seemed to favor me quietly while my parents bent over backward for Mark. That's why my name was on the will. No hesitation. The money used to buy the house originally came from Mark's biological father, not from my grandparents. They used part of that inheritance to buy a house for the family, but intended it only for me. My grandmother made it clear in every note. It was a tangled knot of secrets, betrayals, and quiet acts of protection that had unraveled into this mess I now found myself in. At first, I didn't know what to do. Should I confront my mom? Tell Mark I didn't have to. Because a week later, in another fight, this one after he showed up unannounced again, he said it. "You don't even know the whole story," he snapped. "You're not the only one Grandma and Grandpa screwed over." I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. And that's when he said it. "I've known for years I'm not your full brother. Mom told me when I was 16 I was never supposed to say anything. But when I found out the house was bought with my father's money, I knew it should have been mine." He said it like he was confessing, but there was no shame in his voice, just bitterness. "That's why you forged the document." I asked, "Why you launched that social media campaign? Why you tried to sue me?" His jaw tightened. "Because I knew you'd never just give it up. You'd never see what's fair." I stared at him, stunned. It wasn't just entitlement, it was premeditated. He admitted the lawsuit, the online posts, the fake signature, all part of a plan to push me into a corner until I broke. And my parents. They knew the truth, they'd always known, but they still chose to support him. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as an obstacle to their favorite child's comfort. That night, I sat in my car outside their house. I didn't go in. I just looked at the porch I used to sit on as a kid, waiting for Dad to bring home donuts on Saturdays. I remembered my mom braiding my hair with one hand while stirring a pot of soup with the other. And I realized those versions of them were gone. Maybe they'd never really existed, so I left. I haven't spoken to Mark since I sent my parents one final message. "I know the truth. I know everything. I won't be part of this family until you can be honest with yourselves and with me." No response. The lawsuit is still ongoing, but my lawyer says we're close to shutting it down completely. Between the forged document and the new information, their case is beyond weak. It's laughable. But honestly, the legal win doesn't even feel like the real victory. The real win is this. I finally know who I am. I'm someone who fought for herself, who didn't back down when people tried to shame her, manipulate her, erase her, who stopped asking for love from people who only offered control. I still live in this house. My house. I planted roses last week. I wake up to light streaming through the windows. I cleaned with my own hands. And sometimes I still think about what Mark said, that someday his kid will grow up and know the kind of aunt I really am. And you know what? I hope they do. I hope they grow up and hear both sides of the story. I hope they learn that love isn't measured by silence or sacrifice. And I hope they become someone who knows how to say no even when it's hard, because I did. I said no, and maybe that makes me the villain in their story. But in mine, I finally became the hero. If you were me, what would you have done?